Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. You're all very special to me, and I just want to send my love to each and every one of my listeners. And if you're a new subscriber, you are so welcome to the channel, because we've got phenomenal stories for you on the Saroy channel that you're just going to love. But before we get started, you know the rules. Go and get yourself that effervescent sparkling drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Marcus Fielding stares out at the darkness, following the white line that will lead him to his end. He knows that his end cannot come soon enough. He has longed for this day to arrive. He will be dead soon, and he is very, very glad. For in the end, only then will he experience the peace that he has been craving, like a hardened dieter in a coffee shop, drooling over the tempting, irresistible chocolate cake on display behind the glass counter, waiting for that one ecstatic moment when calories don't count. Suffice to say, in this blissful end of life, Marcus will find an end to the pain, to the grief, to the guilt that has shackled his heart for so long, making him a prisoner to a grievous despair that he can no longer tolerate. An emotional pain that is so aggressively physical, he can feel it pulsating from the tips of his toes to the very last strand of hair on his head. Let's just say, until this pivotal moment in time, Marcus only knew physical pain came as a consequence to a fortuitous accident or a disease that ravaged the body so voraciously, but he had never known that emotional pain could physically really hurt like this. He had had enough. He had reached the point of no return. He wanted out. There was a time when life had been kind to him, when the congenial sunshine had dappled his face with a friendly smile, when the rain had sent refreshing showers streaming down his cheeks, when the earth had invited his bare feet to grace its surface, and he had enjoyed the feel of the green grass massaging his toes, when the days had gracefully rolled into days like the consistent, reliable, undulating waves of the ocean, when the mundane practicalities and routines of daily life had demanded his attention, when the nights came and went under a dark sky, and when uplifting laughter had reverberated through his home, like the joyful trilling tunes of the songbirds in the woodgrove. Today Marcus will remove the unwanted scribbles of his life that he wished had never been written, the notes he wished he'd never ever made, the drawings he wished he had never drawn. When this is all over, Marcus will tear it all out, throw away, discard the chapters of his book that brought him to this place of no return, and the relief he will receive will be beyond measure. These days Marcus has become the background noise in every conversation, with his wife, kids, or even co-workers. He has shrunk away from his life like a tortoise retreating into the safety of its shell. He no longer sings along to the music as he drives along to work each day, tapping the steering wheel in time to its pulsating beats, like he did in the good old days, when life had meaning, purpose, substance and depth, but not anymore. Now his world has faded, like a brand new pair of dark denim jeans that has been through too many cycles in the wash and will never ever look quite the same again. The world these days has lost its glitter, its sparkle, its meaning. It has become a dark, hostile place, where smiles are lost in the dark shadows, laughter drowned in the distant lakes, hope eclipsed in the night sky, like a shooting star that is there 1 minute, gone the next. He could feel his life was closing in on him so tightly, like a boa constrictor squeezing the very life out of him until he can breathe no more and there is nothing left of him. There is no doubt in Marcus's mind that the evanescence of the aimless canvas in his life has become all but a blank, purposeless, flat, empty page, where the only negligible paint you can see is white. Joy knows no memory in his heart. Colour has been eclipsed from his life in all its diversities, tones, shades and tints. In his mind's eye, there is absolutely no point to anything. Marcus aimlessly drives on into the night, his focus on the light beams ahead of him from his headlights that light up the road. Towering obscure trees have become all but menacing tenebrous shadows that loom above the rocky embankments like hunched old men that peer over the road, their vertical forms disappearing into the twilight, their detailed leafy regalia eclipsed by the night. He grips the steering wheel tightly, his heart beating fast. He can feel the earnest vibration in his chest as he edges ever closer to the point of no return, where a choice cannot be unmade once the line has been crossed. Marcus had chosen the spot for his demise over 2 weeks ago, a steep drop on a sharp turn, with a warning sign demanding drivers to proceed with caution, for if your truck goes flying down that sheer edge to the rugged valley below, filled with velvety firs and old groves of ancient trees, you will surely meet your end, beyond question. It would be impossible to survive that steep, uncongenial drop. He is not the first, nor will he be the last, to have ended his life here. But the great news about this location is no one would ever be certain whether it was an accident or not. This event will leave behind it the indelible impression of doubt. Against his better judgment, Marcus reflects over his 2 children, Jake, 12, and Justin, 14, who he will be leaving behind. Justin is one of those slim athletic boys that has the handsome, perfectly symmetrical face of an angel, blonde bouncing hair, blue eyes, a splattering of freckles across his nose, perfect Nordic looks. He is the kind of boy that sails through life so smoothly, on waters devoid of choppy waves, calm, serene winds that know no angst or tumultuous currents. It is like in his life the parking spaces are always available for him when he needs to park his truck. The traffic lights never turn red, for wherever he goes, life just works out for him so fluidly, so seamlessly, without the inevitable barricades and obstacles to block his path, experienced by so many. But for Justin, he knows no such vexating inconveniences. He's the popular boy in school, the one people congregate around and love to be associated with, the one who achieves straight A's without even breaking a sweat, the one who picks up a scratch card and wins $20,000 on a whim, the kind of child that Marcus had loved to hate growing up when he was a young boy. Then there's Jake, his younger beloved son. Jake, who was not so lucky. Jake, who was podgy and plump. Who tries so hard but never gets it right. Who finds life a disappointment, and life in turn finds disappointment in him. Jake with the crooked nose and the round face, who tirelessly struggles to succeed, but often lands flat on his face and has to attempt it all over again, like a toddler learning to walk. The boat Jake is sailing has lost its sails a long time ago. The waters are turbulently choppy, not smooth. Jake, the boy who works so hard, studies relentlessly, eats very little, but remains fat. Jake, whose performance in school, on the sports field and at home, is mediocre, standard, run-of-the-mill. Jake, who reminds him of himself when he was a young boy, only he had never battled with his weight like Jake did. Sadly, Jake had taken after his wife's great-grandmother in this unfortunate regard, who had eaten like a bird all her life and weighed but a ton. For some people it really was about genetic disadvantage and poor metabolism. He knew this well. Jake was the one on who life had not stretched out its favour towards him, or even offered him a scant reward for his gallant efforts and stoic struggles. This outrageous, blatant, indiscriminate unfairness had made Marcus angry, very, very angry. There were times he had scolded God, told him that he wasn't fair. Why did he have so many favourites? Why did he make it so easy for some like his son Justin, and such an arduous struggle for others like Jake? Was there some kind of insane method to this obscene, macabre, treacherous and irrational madness? He did not think so. Marcus had lost respect for God a long time ago. He had seen some of the most miserable, mean people, be blessed with lives devoid of struggle and challenge, who were not deserving of this magnanimous favour. He knew many of these people himself. They had crossed his path from time to time, self-entitled, exceedingly wasteful, vainglorious in their self-infatuation, smothered by an obscene, overindulgent, privileged life, peppered with remarkable good fortune, and they were not worthy of any of it. If Marcus were God, he would have snatched those perks away from those kind of self-indulgent people a very long time ago, so that they might gain a measure of humility, learn what it was like to really struggle. Then there were kind, generous people who had so little, struggled to face the tumultuous storms of life, often with such a stoic, courageous attitude. It wasn't right. Life was so unfair, and Marcus knew when he reached the other side, he had a big axe to grind with God, and he fully intended to get his voice heard. Marcus's thoughts linger over to his long-suffering wife, Crystal, who had put up with him all these years. And for what? He couldn't fathom. He didn't deserve his wife. He knew that. When he looked into her pretty face and her fragile, delicate blue eyes, he was reminded of what he'd done to her, and the shameful guilt he felt about his treachery was overwhelming. And despite what he had done, she had remained loyal, devoted, and faithful to him. Furthermore, she had forgiven him. It might have been easier on him if she hadn't. In truth, he had never been able to forgive himself. This was the quintessential root of all his problems. This was his greatest undoing, the trigger that pressed the button to self-destruct. Marcus felt wretched. If there was any consolation or redemption over what had happened, he had been drunk on that evening in question, but he knew that was a pitiful excuse. How many people blamed booze for their bad behaviour? But it was Marcus who had chosen to drink in the first place. No one had forced the alcohol down his throat. It was Marcus who had said yes to more alcohol, when he could barely stand up or walk in a straight line. Yet he continued to drink. Why things got so out of hand, Marcus could not fathom. But they did, and there was no going back. There was no backtracking. You can't undo your actions, or rewrite the script that you've already acted out. Let's just say, he hadn't even liked the girl in the office that had shamelessly flirted with him day in and day out over the last year, when she started working for the Lewis Strong partnership. She had been fluttering her long fake eyelashes at him, and laughing at all his jokes, many of which had not been remotely funny. But it felt good to be appreciated. He did admit that. Marcus cringes as he recalls how he was persuaded to go to a bar after work, to celebrate a colleague's birthday, when in truth his only desire was to return home to his loving family and beloved wife Crystal, whom he loved more than life itself. Oh, how he had failed her! How he hated himself for what he had done! He saw himself now as a lower form of pond life that deserved no respect. He was bitterly ashamed of what he had done. He knew there were men out there that would say, "Get a grip. It's no big deal. It happened, bro. Get over it." But Marcus had reached a dead end in the road, and he couldn't get over that hurdle that had stolen his joy, robbed his life of all its peace. "Go on," one of his work colleagues had joked. "You never join us for a drink after work. Don't be such a wet blanket, Marcus." Marcus had reluctantly agreed to join them for drinks that night, but he'd never been a big drinker in the first place, and one drink had led to another, and then another, and another. He had failed to call his wife Crystal, and he had stayed in that bar for far too long, until the bar became but a cloudy whirl. He felt as if he was on a boat at sea. Everything began to wobble and spin. He became unsteady on his feet. He had vague memories of Samantha Tansey tapping his knees, being very flirtatious with him. That was all he remembered, as he had fuzzy snippets in his mind of Samantha's laughing face that stared at him in his recall like a manic clown. He awoke in a strange bed, to find himself lying naked, entangled in Samantha Tansey's unfamiliar arms. The scent of her cheap, cloying perfume stuck to his nose. The evidence of their nightly passionate indulgences, clearly seen by the scattering of clothes that lay in a shameful, indelible puddle on the oakwood floor.
"Oh no," he thought, "this can't be happening to me. Not to me."
But he knew that what he was seeing was no dream. He remembered pulling Samantha's arm out of the way, diving out of the bed, with Samantha protesting. "Where are you going, Marcus? Don't leave me. My bed. It's already getting cold without you."
"Home to my wife,"
he said, as he hurriedly, with his back turned away from Samantha, to spare himself some modesty, whatever he had left, began to throw on his clothes as quickly as he could. The shame, the humiliation of what he must have just done, hung over him like a black cloud.
"I don't know what this is all about, Samantha,"
he says, pointing to the clothes heaped on the floor.
"I have no memory of what happened here last night. I am not this person. I don't behave like this."
"Oh, don't be so coy, Marcus. You loved every minute of it last night. You wanted it as much as I did. You couldn't get enough of me. You can protest as much as you like, but last night was amazing. Your wife doesn't have to know about any of this. I won't breathe a word about it. It's our secret. We're both attracted to each other. It's only a bit of fun. We're consenting adults, aren't we?"
"This is no fun for me, Samantha. This is sick and it's warped, and I want no part of it. I don't know what happened last night, and you know I don't want to know. I drank way too much. I wake up in your bed with no memory of how I even got here. I'm going home to my wife to tell her exactly what I've done. And I just pray to God that she will forgive me. I feel disgusted, revulsed with myself. My behaviour last night was not that of a man, but of a hormonal teenage boy who has his mind in his pants. I never knew I was capable of this. I've even shocked myself."
Marcus had done just that. But when he saw the woman he loved looking so hurt, he'd never been able to forgive himself. He had caused such devastation to his best friend, and to see her pain was insufferable to him. And every time he looked at his wife, he was reminded of his iniquity. The relationship with his wife changed. It was like she emotionally distanced herself from him. She was afraid of being hurt again. It was like she emotionally distanced herself from him for her own self-preservation. She was afraid of being hurt. It was like she was looking at him differently, as if viewing him through a different lens, in a less than agreeable light, as if she was thinking, "I don't know you anymore, Marcus." Even though she had forgiven him, he knew he had lost her trust, and to him, that was like losing everything. "I don't know what to say," his wife had said, her eyes filling with tears. You slept with another woman."
"It meant nothing, sweetheart, nothing."
"Is she prettier than me? Is that why you slept with her?"
"Oh, for goodness sake, Crystal, I wish you wouldn't talk like that, putting yourself down. It's ridiculous. There isn't a woman in this world prettier than you. I've always told you that. Samantha doesn't hold a candle to you. She's not even attractive. Girls like her who deliberately set out to sleep with married men, well, they're not right in the head, are they? They probably have issues with self-esteem. God only knows what goes on in their heads. That's why they do it. Samantha's been flirting with me for months, despite knowing I was a married man. She took advantage of me when I was drunk. Not that that is an excuse, of course."
"Is she charming? Funny? Cute?"
"Goodness gracious, no. Honestly, Crystal," Marcus had assured her, "is there anything charming about a woman who seduces you when you're in a drunken state? I have no real memory of what happened. I'm so sorry, Crystal. That woman knew I was out for the count. She got her claws in me when I was in a vulnerable place. I know it's no excuse, but I promise you that's what happened."
His wife had taken his hand in hers and squeezed it tightly, but it broke his heart to see the pain in her face. It grieved him to hurt the person he loved more than anything else in the world. "I forgive you, sweetheart, but it's going to take me a while to get over it. Be patient with me. I know things like this can happen, but thinking of the two of you in bed together, it's just too awful for words. And knowing you even let this happen,
It breaks my heart. You were the one who continued to drink."
It was after that inauspicious night, spent with Samantha Tansey, that left indelible roots so deep they could not be shifted for Marcus, without a bulldozer at the helm. Marcus could bear it no more. The pain of hurting his wife was the final straw, the final nail in the coffin, when enough was enough. He couldn't live with the guilt any more. Some people might be able to brush it off them, as if it was no big deal, but the nauseating self-recriminations stuck to Marcus like chewing gum. If he was out of the way, his wife could begin again. She could press the reset button on her life. She deserved better than him, and he wanted out. Some people might have thought Marcus was being selfish, but he believed he was doing his family a favour, and he knew that for him his life had become meaningless, insipid, as plain as a white page. Of course he loved and adored his family, but they were so much better off without him, and if he had any influence on the other side, he would do everything in his power to help Jake have a better life. On this side of life he could only watch helplessly as his son struggled with mediocrity, while his wife dealt with the grievous blow that he was responsible for inflicting on her. Perhaps on the other side he could help her to heal. Marcus presses the accelerator down as the soulful song, "Hello, darkness, my old friend," thunders through the radio. It reflects the tenebrous state of his mind, and is the perfect exit song for his story. He doesn't want to die with Celine Dion's voice ringing in his ears. No, this is much more appropriate. For a brief second he glances over the events of the last 24 hours, reflecting how people on death row in state prisons can order their favourite meals before they meet their maker. What had he eaten today? Nothing special, really. He'd ordered a tuna fish sandwich at the coffee shop in town, and the bread had been rather too chewy for his liking, while the iced tea he had drunk was so insipid it almost tasted like dirty bath water. Later that day he had dutifully returned home, washed the family cars, mowed the lawn, weeded the tenacious ugly weeds that were treacherously trespassing between the cracks of the red brick paving, and had been a nightmare to eliminate. He had planted some pretty seedlings in the flower bed for his wife to thoroughly enjoy, and watered some of the plants that were looking a little frazzled after the blistering hot heat they'd been having of late. So he'd done a fair amount of chores to help his wife out. He had told his wife how beautiful she was, and how much he adored her, and his 2 children never to forget how precious they were to him. They had both looked at him with bemused, befuddled expressions on their faces. "Dad, you're being so soppy. I want to cringe." He couldn't let any of them know that this was an intentional suicide. People may wonder, given the location of where his truck would be found when his deceased body was retrieved. They'd have to give him the benefit of the doubt that this was a serendipitous, unforeseen accident, as no one would be able to prove the contrary, or otherwise. That was the great thing about exiting life this way. It was uncomplicated and much more trouble-free for all parties concerned, and accidents were much easier to deal with than suicide, and far kinder. Suicide was naturally a choice, but accidents were unexpectedly random, and although tragic, there was less self-recrimination likely to be engaged in an accident, as is often the case in a suicide, when people continue to blame themselves for not seeing this coming, or picking up the signs of a person's depression. Marcus was driving on a treacherous pass on a high road in Nuggetnoggin County in north-central Washington, along the Canada-US border, the largest city in Omark. "Hello, darkness, my old friend," is playing on the radio. This was the moment to go, and he'd never been more ready as he was right now. He takes a deep breath as his car begins to round that sharp corner that twists and curls around the mountain. He's getting close. His fingers tighten their grip on the steering wheel to brace for impact. He can only hope his ending will be quick. Shooting himself in the head with a rifle was a coward's way to go out. He had believed this with all his heart. This was so much neater, a much neater way to end it all. Without a massive crime scene clean-up team arriving to clean up the gruesome splatter the following day. It would be too cruel to do that to his wife, Dying this way, his wife and family would be set up for life with a hefty life insurance policy. Marcus approaches the bend, and the music is now playing soulful words. People writing songs that voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Everything becomes slower as Marcus moves closer and closer to his demise. And then he sees her emerging from nowhere on the edge of the road, her whole body caught up in the light of his truck. The girl runs towards the truck, and Marcus cannot slow down in time. In a moment of exquisite horror, forever imprinted on the landscape, he collides into the young woman. Her body, like a doll, is flung in the air, where it lands in a mangled heap on the ground, at the edge of the road. Her blood spatter has bespeckled his windscreen, while the front of his truck has taken a lashing. He slows down his truck, finding a place to park further along this narrow path. His heart heavy with regret. Why had the young woman run at him? He would not have been able to stop in time, even if he had been going at a slower speed. It was extraordinary, the way she'd run at him. It gave him goosebumps. For a brief second, she had almost seemed like a ghost. For a second, he thought she actually was. What the heck was she doing? That hauntingly sorrowful, almost apologetic look she had given him moments before impact. It tormented him when for a few fleeting seconds her eyes had burned into his, and then the wrath of his car. Well, it had done the rest, had it not? With a seamless efficiency, like the meat being thrown into the grinder at a sausage factory. It had been so surreal. For a moment, he could have been forgiven for believing that this was a dreadful dream. Marcus's account, in his own words. Everything had been going so smoothly for me. I couldn't have asked for a better exit to my life. I was looking forward to meeting my maker. I had some contentious issues I wanted to bring to his attention, about the blatant unfairness of this world that badly needed correcting. But now, the annoying inconvenience of a strange young girl with a pixie-like face and pretty blue eyes had entered my field of vision, and hastily run into the road, gliding towards me like a tennis ball thrown off course. And even though I was going fast on this narrow twist in the road, this girl was running at me, as if she was asking to be mown down by my wheels, as if she was begging for an end to this overwhelming life, as much as I was. She was a stranger, whom I'd never met, but it seemed we both shared the same wish. We wanted out. It was almost like a soulful meeting of minds, an interchange, if you like, in very dramatic circumstances. Then it happened, and she didn't stand a chance. No one could have stood a chance. It is a gruesome sight that is ineffaceably seared into my memory, like an imperishable tattoo, being stubbornly burnt into my flesh, when the young woman's body is flung into the air, like a weightless rag doll. Everything in that poignant moment slowed down to a snail's pace, as the girl crashes to the ground, her delicate body walloping the asphalt road with a mighty thunderous punch. It was an ominous, haunting sound that I shall never ever forget. Many of the velvety-needled trees in the lower valley are steeped in an ambiguous obscurity, sinking gratefully into the dark shadows, the silent witnesses of this horrific event. Beyond that, there is no one else. I immediately pulled my truck over to the side of the road, overlooking the sheer steep drop, which during the day had spectacular views for tourists who don't suffer from vertigo, that is. As I race towards the girl, I know before I even get to her that all hope is lost. But I need to be absolutely sure about this. When I do get to her body, I notice a rather indeterminate, obscure figure is hovering over her corpse, slapping her face, as if trying to revive her. I'm standing about a foot away from this enigmatic scene, wondering who this huge, rather baffling man is, wearing a thick furry coat in the middle of a sweltering summer. Was he an angelic being, I wondered for a moment? Where had he come from? I heard no approaching trucks on this stretch of road.
People know better to leave the area well alone when night falls, as the risk of driving here become quite great, with poor visibility, bad lighting, and sheer rocky ledges that can perilously lead you over the edge.
So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.